They thought I was furniture. They thought my silence meant emptiness. For 3 years, I was the most overlooked person in the building. I was the assistant to the assistant. But while they were fighting for the spotlight, I was learning how to rewire the stage. What if the most powerful thing you can do at work is become invisible? Stay until the end, and I'll show you the exact blueprint I used to go from the back corner to the corner office. I used to think silence was a weakness, a frayed piece of my personality. Now, I know it's the most sophisticated strategy I've ever employed. It is a canvas on which others paint their assumptions, and a fortress that holds the blueprints of my ambition. My name is Claire Matthews. For 3 years, I wasn't just working at Evercrest Dynamics, I was studying it. I was a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the echoing, corporate cathedral. The Evercrest office was a theater of synthetic light and forced performance. Picture it, long, endless valleys of beige carpet and low cubicle walls, segmented by glass rooms where the real noise was made. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, not a comforting sound, but a thin, electric scream, perpetually promising noon even at dusk. I arrived at 7:15 a.m., when the building was still breathing the cold, stale air of the night. My desk was near the back wall, facing the fire exit, a geographical manifestation of my rank, the assistant to the assistant manager. A shadow's shadow. My space was small, a quiet port in the storm of eventual commerce. I kept it austere, a functional monitor, a neat stack of cream-colored post-its, and a single, unsmiling succulent. I wanted no visual anchors to tempt attention. The first ritual of the day was the arrival of the performers. First, Derek. He always entered at 8:45 a.m., smelling faintly of a gym locker and a cologne that tried too hard. His voice was a booming tenor, designed to carry over cubicle walls. He'd spend 20 minutes performing his coffee ritual at the break station, a meticulous layering of oat milk foam and imported cinnamon, all while detailing his weekend mountaineering trip, complete with over-dramatized near misses. Derek was visible, perpetually seeking the spotlight, mistaking volume for value. Then came Lena. Lena was visibly redefined. She dressed in sharp angles and bold colors, her high heels clicking a deliberate rhythm that announced her arrival like a drumroll. She wasn't malicious, just desperately eager. She sought validation in every CC'd email and public compliment. She believed that if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, it didn't get credit. They would look at me, a fleeting glance over a latte rim, and see nothing of interest. Morning, Claire. You're quiet, as always, Derek would chuff, a patronizing half-smile pasted on his face. Quiet for my own good, Lena would joke. They mistook my silence for emptiness. But my mind was a high-resolution camera, constantly recording, indexing, and cross-referencing. Derek's pattern needs 3 external affirmations before 10 a.m. Overpromises, underdelivers, but masters the narrative of effort. His weaknesses were the tedious, repetitive tasks he deemed beneath his strategic mind. Lena's pattern, driven by urgency, not accuracy. Her ambition blinded her to systemic failures. Her reports were always late because she spent too long curating the presentation slide deck. Mr. Holden, our manager. He was a ship captain steering by the rearview mirror. He valued process above outcome, addicted to the comforting weight of a 3-hour meeting. His primary goal was to minimize personal risk. I learned that in a place full of noise, attention isn't given, it's directed. And if you can understand the current, the subtle gravitational pull of influence, you can control it without ever being seen. That realization was my blueprint. My days, outwardly, were a masterclass in mediocrity. I moved through the office like a wave of ambient sound, unheard, unnoticed. My tasks were the detritus of the marketing floor: data entry, report compilation, and calendar alignment. Mundane, crushing repetition. But every time I received a tedious, repetitive task, a question would ignite in my mind: there has to be a better way. This wasn't laziness, it was a surgical application of efficiency. At night, the world shifted. The city outside my apartment window became a low-frequency hum, and my screen became a portal. I consumed tutorials like Fuel, Python scripting, advanced Excel macros, Zapier integrations, automation tools. I wasn't just learning code, I was learning the language of the machine that ran Evercrest. The goal was simple: make the work disappear. I started small. The weekly inventory report, a 3-hour slog of manual data aggregation from 3 different platforms, was my first target. I wrote a small, ugly, beautiful Python script. Click. 20 minutes later, the report was compiled, formatted, and ready. I didn't tell anyone. When I submitted the report, Holden assumed the process had magically become easier. Derek, relieved he no longer had to assist, simply took credit for the smooth flow of the new data. I watched their narratives unfold, silent behind my monitor, the small, internal triumph, a warm, potent drug. This was the core of my invisibility. I optimized the system, but I maintained the original timeline. A 3-hour report still took 3 hours, in their minds. The other 2 hours and 40 minutes? That was pure, unadulterated time for my deeper work. I started mapping the organization's critical infrastructure. I traced the data flows like an architect mapping ventilation systems. I saw where the information was bottlenecked, always Holden's desk, where it was corrupted, usually Derek's hasty input, and where the true power lay, the operational director's centralized dashboards. My quietness became armor, then it became a shield, and finally, it became a mask. Beneath the mask, I was an operational engineer, silently fortifying the very foundations they walked on. The deeper I buried my work, the more indispensable the final structure became. The silence of year 2 was fractured by the seismic event of corporate instability. It was a cold, sharp Monday morning in October. The air conditioning was failing, lending a feverish intensity to the office atmosphere. I was at my desk, the glow of the screen reflecting in my glasses, when the all-staff email landed. Subject: important announcement regarding leadership. The operations director, Ellen Price, had resigned, effective immediately. Burnout, they whispered, a modern corporate euphemism for a soul crushed under the weight of unmanaged chaos. Ellen Price was the organizational linchpin. Her departure didn't just leave a void, it created a vacuum that sucked all the air and logic out of Evercrest dynamics. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Emails, they flooded in, a digital tsunami. Everyone scrambled to claim a piece of Ellen's abandoned authority. The reply-all chain became a gladiatorial arena of self-importance. Meetings, they doubled, then tripled. People met to discuss who should meet next. The glass conference rooms became permanent fixtures of panicked brainstorming, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline of fear. Productivity, it has halved. When everyone is fighting for the visibility of leadership, no one is doing the grunt work of maintenance. I watched the spectacle with the detached fascination of a sociologist studying a colony of ants after their queen has vanished. The system, stripped of its central nerve, began to falter. Small, insidious mistakes multiplied. The inventory reconciliation failed. The client communication matrix lost its sync. Reports, the reports I had secretly automated for months, suddenly started throwing errors because Holden tried to improve the source data. Chaos is a test. And I, the invisible employee, was the only one with the answer key. I fixed what I could, always from behind the scenes. I didn't send emails claiming credit. I simply patched the broken code, rerouted the failing data streams, and restored the corrupted files. I was the emergency maintenance crew that no one knew existed, working in the dark crawlspace beneath the floorboards of the company. My adrenaline was a cold river, not a raging torrent. I felt a strange calm, a sense of ultimate control. They are panicking over the fire on the roof, I thought, but I am holding the water valve in the basement. 2 weeks of organized anarchy later, the office was a wreck of forgotten coffee mugs and stressed-out faces. The market was punishing Evercrest for its instability. The rumors were swirling: layoffs, restructuring, failure. The CEO, Mr. Larson, a man I had seen maybe 3 times in 3 years, a myth of upper management, called for an emergency, mandatory team meeting. The entire floor is crammed into the main glass conference room. The air was thick, suffocating, scented with fear and desperation. Larson stood at the head of the polished oak table, his face a mask of disappointment. He was a man accustomed to seeing order, and now he was looking at a mess of his own making. "We need someone to step in temporarily, to handle Ellen's operational duties," he said, his voice clipped and dry. "Until we can hire a replacement." The silence that followed was heavy, an actual physical presence. Eyes darted, silently calculating the risk versus the reward. Every visible, ambitious person in the room, Derek, Lena, others, knew this was a career-defining opportunity, but also a poison chalice. They were all too visible, too exposed to the failure of the past 2 weeks. No one moved. Then, from the back of the room, near the espresso machine, a voice cut through the tension. It was Lena. Not booming like Derek, but clear, professional, and startlingly rational. "What about Claire?" Every head, like a mechanical bird display, swiveled toward me. Me? The quiet one in the corner? The shadow? I felt their surprise like a wave of static electricity, 1,000 tiny needles of shock and confusion hitting my skin. Derek's jaw dropped, a perfect visual of disbelief. Lena continued, her voice gaining confidence, perhaps realizing the truth of her own statement. "She already keeps everything running. Half the processes Ellen handled, the critical, background data flows, Claire's been managing them for months. Better than anyone else. A perfect, accidental testimony." Lena, desperate for a solution, had finally, inadvertently, seen the structure beneath the performance. Larson, the CEO, blinked once. His eyes, keen and ruthless, fixed on me for the first time. "Is that true?" The moment was a suspended breath. My hands, resting on the cold formica table, felt suddenly heavy, alien. All the years of calculated invisibility were about to dissolve. My armor was coming off. I just try to make sure the team has what it needs," I managed, my voice softer than I intended, yet somehow carrying authority because it wasn't desperate. I offered no excuses, no grand claims, only simple maintenance. Larson nodded slowly. He didn't need flair, he needed a solution. "Impressive," he said, the word ringing with cold, absolute truth. "Then let's make it official, on a trial basis. Claire, you have the operations floor." Just like that, the invisible employee was placed in charge of the entire foundation. My first week in Ellen's old office was surreal. The room was glass, a spotlight. I was no longer near the fire exit, I was in the center of the stage. The walls were still glass, but now the gaze was reversed, they were outside, and I was inside the illuminated box. At first, the visible, ambitious ones, Derek and his kind, waited for me to falter. They expected me to drown in the complexity of the data flows, or fail to manage the political landscape. But the work spoke for me, with a clear, irrefutable voice. The workflow. I didn't invent new processes, I simply activated the streamlined ones I had built in secret. The efficiency jump wasn't gradual, it was immediate. Reports that were habitually late were now delivered 48 hours early. The communication, I cut the meeting load by 70%, creating short, hyper-focused digital summaries instead. I replaced the noise with information. The bottlenecks, I fixed them with the code I wrote at 3 a.m. The system stopped stuttering and began to sing. The shift in the office culture was palpable, a tectonic change felt by everyone. First came the curiosity. Then the reliance. "Claire, can you check this for me?" became a daily litany. "Claire, how did you automate that file?" was asked with a mixture of awe and professional jealousy. "Claire, I think we should run this by you before sending it." This was the ultimate signal. Respect. It wasn't affection or camaraderie, It was the profound respect one gives to the essential structure, the power source, the gravity itself. One afternoon, 3 months into my trial, Mr. Larson stopped by my glass office. He didn't knock, he simply appeared in the doorway, a tall, imposing silhouette. He smiled, a genuine, tired, relieved smile. "You know Claire," he said, leaning against the doorframe, looking out at the humming office floor. "It's funny. You've been here all along, and yet, it feels like we're just noticing you for the first time. Like finding the manual to the whole company." I smiled back, a quiet victory flickering in my chest, not flashy, but deep and sustaining. "Sometimes, Mr. Larson," I said softly, looking out at the beige world I now controlled, "it takes silence to be heard. It takes building the foundation instead of chasing the light." Years later, I sit in a much larger office, higher up, where the windows look out over the actual city, not the fluorescent imitation of it. I'm the chief operating officer now. I guide the younger employees, the ambitious ones, who still chase the flash. They ask me the same question, their eyes full of hungry eagerness: "How did you rise through the ranks so quickly?" I tell them the truth, the only truth that matters in this corporate ecosystem. I didn't rise quickly. I rose slowly. Patiently. Invisibly. I tell them about the quiet work, the hours spent in the dark, learning the language of the machine. I tell them I didn't fight for the spotlight, I built the foundation it stood on. And when the time came, when the noise around me faded, when the performance art collapsed, and the structure began to crumble, I was the only one left who knew how to keep the system breathing. That's the thing about quiet work, it's like oxygen. You don't notice it until it's gone. They think the goal is visibility. They think the prize is attention. But attention is fleeting, it is a cheap, temporary energy source. The true prize is control. The true power is in the structure, the logic, the automated, undeniable flow of the indispensable. So, no, I'm not invisible anymore. I am the architect. I am the gravity. I am, unequivocally, indispensable. So, my advice is simple: stop performing for the applause. Start building the architecture they depend on. Because when the spotlight inevitably fails, the only one standing in the dark with the true blueprints will be you.